We're at the Medical Arts Building, coming to see Dr. Bartlett, and this is the 16th floor. Who? No, haven't seen him yet.
Except good food and a good clean life. That was all it was. And another thing about the TB was it's very contagious. And in those days, the native people lived in the summertime in a tent, usually by a lakeside, so they could have water and to get fish, and their dog teams could get water. And they'd live by the lake in the summer in their tent, and in the wintertime they would move out on their trap lines and they'd build a little log cabin, about 12 feet square, and they'd live there. And the whole family live in one cabin, maybe 6 people or so in a 12-foot square cabin, and very crowded together. And the floor was spruce boughs, and the bed was spruce boughs, and some of them would have an oil drum for a stove, or a little tin stove with a pipe going up through the chimney, and some that didn't even have a pipe, just went smoking up through a hole in the roof. And they used no way to wash the dishes in the wintertime. And so the germs passed back and forth all the time. So it was no wonder that it got to be common. And yet there were, in that same family, you'd sometimes see an old lady living there who'd done this all her life, and she was okay. And yet she'd been around TB all her life. And I think what happened is that she would get an immunity. She got it early in life and she got immune to it, and so she didn't get sick from it. And it posed a big problem for me for looking after sick people. We had a small hospital at the mine. It had 4 beds, and I could put people in there when they got sick, and we had a room with 4 beds. Yeah, but I went there, I said, this will be very democratic, everybody be treated the same. And so I got a sick Indian person, I put them in the hospital, and then I found out about the TB. It's not safe. You can't put in people that have TB with people that don't. So I had to get some way to look after sick native people when they needed a hospital. And without putting people without TB with them. And in those days, the Department of Indian Affairs was administered not by Health and Welfare, but by Mines and Natural Resources. They wouldn't give you any money for anything. They were very stingy with the money. So I needed a hospital, and I needed a staff, and yet we had no money. How are we going to do that? So I had an idea, and I called in the chief, Tom Fiddler, and some of the counselors. I said, look, Tom, we have to do something with this, and I have a way that we can do it. I said, you build log cabins for your trap lines. I want you to build me a good-sized log cabin on the edge of town, and when a sick person moves into it, I will go out every day to look after them, and I can get them rations on the company store so they have food, and I have that authority. I can issue rations, and when they get better, they can move out, and some other family can move in, and the family members will look after the sick person. So I said that should work. And Tom said, yeah, that's a good idea, we'll do it. Well, the whole damn summer went by, and no logs got cut, nothing got built. And I kept after him. I'd say, Tom, we've got to get that done because winter's coming and we've got to do it. He'd say, yes, yeah, we'll do it. So, but he never did it. So I went to the mine manager and I said, look, we've got to do this. And we got to get that building up before winter. When you put a crew of men on there and get it done, he said, we'll do it. So they built it. I bet that building is still standing. It was well built. It was about, I would say, 24 by about 15 feet, built on the side of a hill with front porch and steps. I have pictures of it. As a matter of fact, the pictures that you have on the internet of me up there have a picture of that building. There's a picture of me giving a vaccination clinic to young people in front of that building. And in that building, I had I treated my first patient with penicillin. Penicillin had just been discovered. It wasn't on the market yet. And I had a small supply I obtained from the National Research Council in Ottawa, and I got it because I was in an isolated area. They gave me a small amount. And one night, about midnight, a lady was brought down on toboggan and dog team from Island Lake, because I was their closest doctor. I guess it'd be about, 75 miles to Island Lake, is it? Something like that. And they brought her in, and she was very sick. And I put her in this Indian hospital. We had special beds made in there. I had them make wooden beds and hinged in the middle so I could prop them up. If they had trouble breathing, I could bend the bed up. So it was a good place. And I put her in there and I said I think this is where I should use my penicillin. I haven't got much, but I think this lady deserves it. So I gave her the penicillin. It was in that building that I invented a special needle for giving intravenous. And that special needle now is used all around the world. And it was used first in that log cabin building. The lady got better, and she went home. So that was how we solved that problem. And always waited to solve a problem. And but TB was the big problem. Diabetes is now. The reason for that is that there are two reasons for the diabetes. One is that there's a gene. Your race carries a gene that makes you liable to have diabetes. It's not your fault. It's there. Just like having brown eyes, you can't change it, and it's there. But in the 7 years that I was there, I only saw 1 or 2 cases of diabetes, and I did many tests on many people. And the reason is they were thin. People were thin. The average man would weigh about 120, 130 pounds. And now I bet the average man weighs 175 or more. And that's why. So there's 2 reasons for the diabetes. And we had a dog team, and the policeman and I shared the dog team. We both used it. And it's not a very good way to travel. You have to feed them all summer, and then just use them for a few months in the winter. But it was different. And I remember one time we had this dog team we had gotten from Father Dubois. Did you ever hear of that name, Father Dubois? Mm-hmm. And Brother Dussault. They were the only white people at Sandy Lake, except for Hudson Bay store. That's all there was. Probably 3 people. And Father Dubois was the priest, and they had some pups. He said they were Labrador and wolf. I don't know. One of them did look like a wolf. And I bought these pups from him, and we raised them up for sleigh dogs. And then we got one other called Pateau. And Pateau was a sleigh dog, but he'd been raised by some white people in their house as a pet. but he got too big and his tail would knock off the lamps off the table, and too big for the house. They wanted to get rid of him, and they gave him to us for the dog team. Well, Pateau didn't want to be in the dog team. He wasn't happy there at all. At one time, I had a call to go and deliver a baby, and that was about 3 miles down the road. This is in the wintertime. About 3 miles down the road, about 3 miles down the lake, and about another mile into the bush where the lady was. And I went with the dog team. I had a pack sack I kept packed up all the time, ready to go. And I put Pateau in the back next to the toboggan. But he didn't want to be there at all. He just put out his legs straight like that, and he wouldn't run at all. And the other dogs had to drag him all the way. So I went in and I delivered the baby, and it was one of those log cabins like I told you about. A little square shack, 12 feet square, with an oil drum in the middle and a hole in the roof to let the smoke go out, and spruce boughs for a bed. I delivered the baby there, and everything went very well. And when it came out, I said, well, I'll put Pateau in the front, and then if he doesn't work, the other dogs will just run over him. That'll make it work. So I went to unhook his traces. He jumped at me like that, right for my throat. And if he got me down, probably the whole pack would have killed me. That was one of the closest shaves I ever had. I had just one trace unhooked, the other was still fastened. So I jumped back and I said, the heck with them. I went home alone. I walked home alone. I left the dog team by themselves and do what they liked. And so when I got home, I went to my partner, the policeman. I said, we have to shoot Pateau. Oh, we can't shoot Pateau. He's a good dog. I said, he would have killed me if I had unfastened the other trace. I'd been dead. Well, he wouldn't shoot him, so we gave him away, and he ended up in the dog team, whether he liked it. That was Pateau. Another story there was air sickness. Air sickness. We had the only way to get around was the airplane, unless you take days to go by canoe. To go to Sandy Lake from the mine, I used to go by canoe. You can do that in half a day. But anywhere else, any of the other communities, you had to fly. And I didn't have that much time. But I was always airsick. Even when I was a kid, I couldn't go on a merry-go-round or a Ferris wheel. I'd get sick. And we had no good pills for sickness in those days. And I'd just lie on the floor. And when I get to the place we're going to, I'd have to lie down for about an hour before I could do any work, because my head's going round and round. And I remember one time I went to a northern community. I don't remember which one it was, but I went there and I got out of the airplane. I was really sick, and I lay down on the dock, which was solid, and it started to rain, just sprinkling a little bit. I just stayed there. I didn't move. And I remember the Indians came out and walked around and laughing at me. I just stayed there. It didn't matter. And another time at Red Lake. Red Lake was our closest bigger district, and my wife was with me that time, and it was a really rough trip. And I was lying on the floor, and the plane was full of fish and furs and so on. And we got to I was really sick. Got to Red Lake, and I get out of I didn't move. I just stayed in the plane while they unloaded it. And then the pilot said to my wife, "You got to get him off there, lady, because we're taking off." And so I crawled out of the plane and onto the dock, and then the Lincoln dock is floating. It's tipping like this. It makes it even worse. So I got onto the land. It was beside there was a sloping sidewalk beside it. I lay down on the grass, pulled my hat down over my face, and just laying there. A couple of miners came by, and they walk around me looking at it and say, "It's only Friday. We had lots of stories. I just jotted down a few. Oh yes, I had the language. I used to. I learned a little bit of the language, but not enough to be good at it. But I could get along. And I had an interpreter, two of them actually. One was Mrs. Leach, Leach, Kathleen Leach. She was the grandmother of Reg Leach, who was the famous hockey player. Yeah. That was her grandson. And she used to come all the time and interpret for me. The other one I had was Matilda, and she had come from Island Lake. I don't recall her last name, but she was very good and a very pleasant woman. Yeah, I have that list of words. Yes, I still have that. Well, those are some of the stories that we did there. And it was a very good life. I enjoyed it. It was a good life. I wouldn't have stayed there if there hadn't been Indian people to look after. Because there were not enough white people to keep me interested, to keep me busy. There was lots of work in the Indian community. But I never would have believed that you'd end up with 2,000 people there. And there were just a few hundred at that time.
Almost 3,000.
How many?
Almost 3,000 now.
Imagine that, yeah, imagine that. I never would have believed it. Because in those days, they were not living in one town. There were different bands scattered around the country. Family, a few families together. And they live in tents in the summer and log cabins in the wintertime. But I never would have believed you'd end up with 3,000 people. It's a lot of people. Anything you'd like to ask me about?
Do you remember treating a cute little boy with polio?
With polio?
Yeah.
There was a boy that I remember, I have a picture of him, who couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And he crawled around on his hands and knees. And he had pads on his knees. But he crawled around on all four like a dog. And I remember on a trip there, I wanted to take him home with me and send him to Winnipeg to see if they could do anything for him here. We have a children's hospital for crippled children. But he wouldn't come. And somebody told me later that he went his whole life like that he eventually passed away. Is that the one you're talking about?
I probably know the one you're talking about. Yeah. But I had polio when I was about 1. I was born in 1947.
Yes.
And my parents took me to the mine and they told me that there was a doctor there that saved my life.
No, that'd be the only one.
Yeah.
What was wrong with you?
I had polio.
I see.
Yeah.
Well,
but that I would have been only 1 year old or something like that before.
Well, I wouldn't have saved your life because there wasn't any good treatment.
Yeah.
It was nature that saved your life.
Yeah.
I would just be an onlooker.
Well, I came here to say thank you for being an onlooker.
Well, that's very good.
And I want to say thank you for
Good.
looking after me.
Very
I've always
good.
thought about
Yeah.
what my mom was telling me,
Yeah.
how good of a doctor you were.
It may not have been polio, because I'm not aware of any polio at that time. I don't recall any polio at all. It must have been something else.
Yeah.
It could have been something else. When I left there, I had all these records. And I made a list, and I said, here's people that need to be watched. These are people that have problems that need to be watched. You've got a little bit of TB or something like that. I made a list of all the ones that I thought needed to be watched. And I took it to the Department of Indian Affairs. I said, that's the best place for it. So I gave it to the Department of Indian Affairs in Winnipeg. But I don't know what they ever do. I tried to find it later and get them, and they didn't know anything about it. It disappeared somewhere. But, so I haven't got the records, but they were all there. They were not big records. They were written on cards with pen and ink. And another thing was at Deer Lake, there was Oscar Lindoken. That name's probably familiar to you. And his wife Jean, and they had a son Jimmy. And they had been there for many, many years. They ran a trading post, and they were very good. And they had good relations with the Indian people. And Oscar was kind of a wild man. He would come over to the mine every once in a while and get his mail, and he'd get drunk and stay for a few days, and he'd go to the dance. They'd have a dance, and the women would dance with him. They didn't want to, but they didn't want to say no. He would fling them around. He had a what they call a snow plane. It was a cabin that you sat in with skis on the bottom and an airplane engine behind with a propeller. Yeah. And the propeller was encased in wire, so you couldn't stick your arm in it. And it would travel with that. This noise was terrible. And but it would go fast. And you'd go up the lakes with this and along the trails. You'd have to have a wide trail to do it. But his son Jimmy came over. I took his tonsils out. And while he was at the mine, somebody took him around and showed him, there was one couple that had a few chickens. They were white chickens. And they took Jimmy to see these chickens, and he looked at them and he says, he'd never seen chickens before. He said, them ain't chickens, them's gulls. And Jimmy grew up, and his father bought him a plane. He became a pilot. And he was, just like his dad, he was very reckless. And he got his license taken away because in Kenora, he flew underneath the bridge. And later on, he was killed. His plane crashed somewhere, and they didn't find him for a long time. And he'd been partly eaten by bears when they did find him. So he had a rough life. But Oscar was quite the guy. Father Dubois always wore a black skirt and drove a dog team a lot. And drove his dog team all over the place to different communities. And they also had a bombardier. That was about the size of an automobile, but mounted on tracks like a skidoo. And you sat inside it. And it was a real cabin, just like inside of a car. Actually bigger than that and heavier than a car. Because it had these metal tracks like a tractor. And they could travel all over. But they had to cut trails for they need a big road, wide road. So they could only go where they could go down the lakes or rivers, but they only go through the bush where someone had cut a trail. So I had a ride in, very noisy, and it gave about 4 miles to a gallon. Very expensive to run. Well, those are some of the stories about Favorable Lake.
You must have been a very young man when you got your medical license.
I was 24.
24.
Yeah.
24.
Yeah. I started to study medicine when I was 17. It was a 6-year course.
Where?
6 year.
Where did you study?
London, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what made you go up north to study?
Oh, that's a good question. It's an interesting story. Actually, it all happened. I wouldn't even be here if you trace it back, because a girl ran a sliver in her foot. The whole reason I'm here is because the girl ran a sliver in her foot. It's a roundabout story, but it's a fact. I was planning. World War II was on, and new doctors were expected to join the army and go over and fight. And that was my plan. I had trained, and I had papers as a captain. My plan was to do an internship. You have to do an internship, work in a hospital for a year. And I did that, and that's where I met my wife. She was a nurse. And my plan was to get married and then go overseas. And I had a classmate who was older, quite a bit older than me. He was about 35. He had been an insurance salesman before he went into medicine. And his brother was a doctor down near Hamilton. And the doctor's daughter had run a sliver in her foot, and she got tetanus, lockjaw, which is a very, very serious infection. And they're afraid she would die. So the doctor, who is the father, who was the doctor, took time off to be with her complete 124 hours a day. And so he had to have his practice. So he asked my classmate to look after his practice. My classmate wasn't going in the Army because he was 35 years old. And so he asked me if I would go down and look after his practice. I just finished interning, and this is in southern Ontario. So I did. I went down to look after his practice, and they didn't have any office hours on Wednesday afternoons. So I was sitting in the waiting room on Wednesday afternoon just reading, because there's no appointments that day. And here's a little magazine with advertisements in it looking for doctors. And one was from Favorable Lake. They wanted a doctor in a mining town. And that appealed to me. And so I wrote to them, and I said, I can come, but only for 6 months because I'm going in the Army. So I went up there, we got married, and we flew in. We had to do it all in a hurry because freeze-up was coming. And you can't fly during freeze-up. There's about a month when you can't fly. And while I was there, and he said he accepted me because I was honest, because I told him I was only going to stay 6 months. That's why he accepted my application. Well, while I was there, the government passed a law. You couldn't leave a remote community unless you found somebody to take your place. So I advertised, and I wrote to some friends of mine, classmates and so on. Nobody wanted to go. So I said, okay, I'll stay. So I stayed there. So it's all because that girl ran the sliver in the foot, or I never would have got to Favorable Lake. But the first time we got there, the first trip in, we went to Lactabani and flew in, and I've never been in a plane before because there were no planes in those days, just foot planes. There's no planes across Canada. You had to take the train. And I was really sick. And my wife said that we're getting close, and my wife said, now, I was lying on the floor and I had my tie open and everything. And my wife said, now, we're getting close, sit up and fix yourself up, because there'll be somebody there to meet you, and you've got to look good. I said, I couldn't care who was there. I said, I couldn't care if the Queen is there to meet me. And I said, furthermore, I'm not going to leave this place until they build a road in me. But I learned to fly. There were lots of challenges. And then the first freeze-up, right shortly after that, because we got there just before freeze-up. What happened to me, I myself got an attack of appendicitis. I got an acute appendix, there's no question about it. I had all the features of appendicitis. I had the temperature, I had a white blood count, I had the pain and so on. And what am I going to do? There's nobody to take out my appendix. And if it ruptures, I'd probably die. So what am I going to do? We had no antibiotics in those days, just sulfa drugs. Penicillin wasn't even discovered yet. So I called in the carpenter and the mechanic, and I said, look, I might have to take out my own appendix. It might be my only way. I said, we start preparing in case I do. I hope I don't. I said, I want you to build me, if I need it, can you build me a table shaped like that, so I can half sitting up, and so I'm half sitting up, and then put a big mirror up here on the ceiling so I can look in the mirror and see what I'm doing. And if I have to, take out my appendix? And they said, sure, we do. And, but I went to bed, and I didn't take any solid food. I just took liquids. I put ice on it, and I took the sulfa drugs, and it got better. So I didn't have to take it. I did have to do one thing to myself. I got a ganglion, a lump on the back of the wrist. And it got quite big, and it was painful. It would hurt when I was typing or when I'm paddling a canoe. It would hurt. And it got both sides of an olive. And I should be removed. But I couldn't go away and leave the community with no doctor in case you couldn't do that. So I said to the nurse, sterilize the infants, I'm going to take this out. They said, you're crazy. So I said, you help me. And so we did it. I froze it and cut it open and cut it out and stitched it up with my left hand. And the nurse, to tie the knots, the nurse would hold one end and I'd tie the other. So we had some adventures. Well, those are the main things that I but it was a good experience all around. Good experience.
I have a question.
Pardon?
Can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, I may not answer it.
Yes, how old are you now?
I'm 96.
My goodness.
96. I still operate. I do minor surgery now. I was operating this morning. It was an interesting life, but the best thing I did there was to invent the needle I told you about. That was the best thing, because that went all over the world. And the problem there was that when you give a patient intravenous, you put the needle in the vein, you hook it up to a bottle, and the medicine runs into the vein. But the patient moves the arm around, and the needle goes through the vein, and then the fluid runs under the skin, doesn't run in the blood. It happened all the time, all over the world. And what they did was take the needle out and put it in another vein. And it happened to me in this, giving this penicillin, this lady from Island Lake. She moved her arm and the needle went through the vein and it ran under the skin. It doesn't do any harm, but it doesn't do too much good. So I put it in another vein and I put a plaster cast on her arm so she couldn't move it too much. And that lasted for a few days, but still went through the vein. So I said, well, I should be able to solve that problem. And I took a needle and I ground the point off so it wasn't sharp, it was just blunt. Just blunt on the end, no point. And I beveled that a little so it wasn't too blunt. And then I passed that needle through another needle like that, just so it's tight. I took the needle that was blunt. Sorry, the needle was blunt like this. I passed another needle through it with the point sticking out. Get the idea?
Mm-hmm.
And then the inside needle, I hooked it up to a syringe. And I put that combination in the vein. I pulled back on the syringe to get blood, so I know I'm in the vein. And then I pull out the needle with the point on it and push in the needle with no point. So now I got a needle in the vein, there's no point on it, it can't perforate. And that system now is used all over the world. I sent it to the Mayo Clinic and they developed it. And well, that was probably the best thing I did at Favorable Lake.
Great. That's something.
Yeah. Well, I better be on my way.
What was on the other end? What was holding the penicillin?
Oh, a bottle.
A bottle.
Bottle. Hang it up on the pole.
Did you make the bottle?
Oh, no,
Oh.
we had bottles. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the manufacturers making good bottles.
Yes, I want to thank you very much for your time.
Very good. Very good. Pleasure.
I'm just going to ask you another question. Are you free to have another meeting with us sometimes?
Yes, sometime. My time is pretty busy, but
Yeah.
sometime, yeah. But I think I've told you everything I have to say.
Well, I'll call ahead of time.
All right.
We'll
okay.
call ahead of
Sure.
time.
Yeah, but I haven't much more to add to what I've told you all the interesting stories I can
Yeah.
think of.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Your stories are very interesting.
what you should be doing now, what the community should be doing now, I think, they should be concentrating on sports. You should, because you've got every opportunity. You can build a rink. You could get some more, right, develop some good hockey players like Reg Leach. And sports would keep the weight down and be less diabetes and less severe. That's what I'd recommend you do. There are lots of young people, lots of opportunity for sports. You can do all kinds of skating, skiing, hockey, tennis. You could do all kinds of sports, and you might get some very good players instead of watching TV and eating potato chips.
Yeah, that's right. I just want to mention myself. I've seen lots of doctors in my life,
Yeah.
and I know you were my first doctor.
Is that right?
The first doctor appointment I had was with you.
Well,
When the night I was born, they took me to go see you. That was my first appointment.
well, here you are. 75 years later, we're still going. I myself exercise an hour every morning, almost every morning. I lift weights. I take 35 pounds in each hand, and I do that 30 times and so on. And I run on a treadmill. While I'm doing that, I listen to a medical lecture on a tape recorder, so I'm learning at the same time.
That's good.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's how you keep going.
You need to come and visit us.
Pardon?
You need to
Can we
come
go on a
and
plane?
You need to come and visit.
Pardon?
You need to come to visit Sandy Lake.
Yes, well, I doubt if I ever will. I don't even get back to Stratford anymore. I haven't been down there. I don't travel much. I used to travel a lot because I was on the board of directors of the medical associations. And I've been to every capital city in Canada except Yellowknife. I haven't been there. Been right across the country. Enough traveling.
Well, we heard so much about you all our lives,
Yeah.
and we're glad.
Well, you still have my picture in your community
Yeah,
card. Yeah. Good.
Your picture is there, and the picture they're taking today, they'll put it
Yeah.
right beside your picture.
Right, okay.
I'm gonna go get a
Well,
camera.
they were interesting years. We enjoyed them. My wife did too. She enjoyed them. My wife, so afterwards, when we moved, she destroyed it. She didn't bring it.
Oh, that was bad.
Yeah, Dr. Bartlett,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a picture of everyone plus
All
yourself.
right, okay.
So I was thinking maybe,
Who looks after the
well,
website?
I'll stand over there and everyone can kind of meet over here. Yeah, we'll just move some of the chairs over. Oh, I'll be right there.
Okay, come right here.
Just have this, just wait, we'll take a picture.
How do you like my fish?
Should we,
Very good.
and everyone will stand or
Yeah,
everyone
And-
will
Well, she changed her mind for me.
We'll get
I
you
like your
some-
sign.
Yeah, yeah, no
Don't
fish.
kill the fish.
No fish.
Diane, do you want Suzanne?
No hunting.
We're gonna get you to sit in the middle, Dr. Bartlett.
Where do you want me to sit? Over here?
I'll move the chair here, Dr. Bartlett. Or bring my- Do you want him to sit there?
Yeah.
Okay. On that, over there.
Then everybody's gonna come close.
Behind you.
Before we take pictures.
Behind them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That'll be yours first. Okay.
That one?
I'm gonna take this chair out. Or, you got one? Okay, I'm gonna take this one out.